Tonight, the anxious wait continues in southeast Queensland ahead of Cyclone Alfred crossing the coast tomorrow. And northern New South Wales is already being hammered by severe weather with warnings of major flooding. Hello, I'm Isabel Dayman, live from Adelaide. This is ABC News. Also tonight, investigations underway into how a teenager boarded a flight in Victoria armed with a shotgun and knives. And February sees ambulance ramping worsen outside South Australian hospitals. Cyclone Alfred is bearing down on Australia's east coast, with the worst of the weather still to come. Alfred is the first tropical cyclone to make a direct hit on Brisbane and the Gold Coast in more than 50 years. The storm is predicted to make first contact with land as a Category 2 system before heading inland. The impact will be felt along a 600-kilometre stretch of the coast from Queensland's Double Island Point to Yamba in New South Wales, bringing intense rainfall, destructive wind gusts and wild seas. 4.5 million people live in the path of the storm. Life-threatening flash flooding is expected before the crossing. More than 80,000 homes are without power tonight, and up to 800 millimetres of rain is possible within the next 3 days. Our reporters are spread throughout New South Wales and Queensland tonight. We begin our coverage with Mark Willisey in Brisbane.
It's a threat not seen here in a generation. Ferocious winds ripping massive trees from their roots on the Gold Coast. The consequences devastating, with homes crushed by falling branches. Tens of thousands are without power and fearing what's still to come.
Not looking forward to tonight because we've got windows all around.
Scott Maxwell was lucky to escape uninjured when a huge tree fell on his Currumbin home.
I woke up at 2 o'clock this morning with a loud thud and the whole house shook.
The savage conditions taking even experienced hands off guard.
I'm used to cyclones, so I come from Magnetic Island, North Queensland, so Category 5. I wasn't worried about Category 2. I should have been.
The Gold Coast's famous beaches, unrecognisable. Massive swells are gouging chunks out of the coastline, leaving a jagged wall of sand with a breathtaking drop.
We're all quiet, I think we're all in awe of what's happening right now.
Unbelievable what nature can do.
Structures now left exposed to the elements, and some hinterland roads are starting to go under. This lot will need a shower before they bunker down, potentially for a while.
It's possible that we're going to ask people to shelter for 24 to 36 hours.
One of the nation's most built-up regions is at the mercy of Tropical Cyclone Alfred. The storm's slow progress allowing for final walks and preparations in Brisbane this morning. After an agonising wait, most just want to see the back of it.
But now we're breathing deeply because the pause just adds a little bit more pressure.
We've both not been through anything like this before.
The power is probably the main concern.
City life has ground to a halt. The streets are mostly empty.
Humans rally in times of crisis, and people really have.
Potential projectiles have been corralled. Families are ready.
It's like you're waiting for a meal to come to the table and you're just sitting there waiting.
The Cyclone Alfred moves across the Moreton Bay Islands overnight. It's expected to weaken from a Category 2 to a Category 1 system before crossing the mainland tomorrow morning.
This will mean that destructive winds are unlikely for Brisbane itself, but damaging wind gusts to 120 kilometres per hour are expected.
While Alfred's slow pace has given southeast Queensland time to prepare, it comes with a sting in the tail. Authorities say it could take the tropical cyclone anywhere between 6 to 9 hours to cross the coast. In the process, it could dump life-threatening and dangerous flooding rains on low-lying areas. Rainfall totals for the event could reach 800 millimetres in some areas.
In this case, it is really large and slow moving, and that does represent the prospect of some significant rainfall.
Potentially exceed the levels we saw in the 2022 flood. And so if that is not a reason to take this seriously, I don't know what is.
Authorities expect to release water from the region's main dams in the coming days. Islands just off the coast are already being pounded. Kangaroos are fleeing. Hatchlings are off to a turbulent start.
But it's coming now, you can feel it's in the air.
It'll be a sleepless night for many, with more to come as the expected flood disaster unfolds. Mark Willisey, ABC News, Brisbane.
The damage from Cyclone Alfred is already visible on the New South Wales coast. Wild tides and storm surges are eroding some of the state's most popular beaches. Experts say it's to be expected, but the worst of the weather's yet to come.
With Cyclone Alfred on their doorstep, communities on the edge of the ocean are securing what they can.
And it's roaring, absolutely roaring. So I've tied it all up, made sure everything was slashed down, and yeah, it should be all right.
This is a serious issue for those communities, particularly low-lying communities close to the coast as well.
High tides and damaging surf are starting to erode Byron Bay's famed beaches.
When those waves have so much energy, that's when they actually need to lose some of their energy, and by that means they actually take that sand away from the beach.
So there has been coastal surges. There are still some considerable high tides that are occurring. A number of the beaches have been affected, but we're still very early in this cyclone hitting the sea.
As water levels rise, animals are also being displaced. This eel was rescued after washing into a gutter in Ballina.
You'd be lost there, mate.
While a turtle found itself lost on the streets of Benora Point.
I'll help you out, get you back in the water, safe.
Several major flood warnings have been issued for rivers between Port Macquarie and Tweed Heads. Coastal communities like Ballina will be first in line for a battering when Alfred arrives. Sandwiched between rivers and the ocean, the risk that floods could clash with a storm surge means that homes like these are particularly vulnerable. Sam Ryder moved into his home on the Richmond River just 4 weeks ago.
Like, the attitude from most of the people in this area is pretty casual, so we'll see what happens. It could be bad. We put the sandbags out just to kind of stop the wake and whatnot. Like, you'll never keep water out completely.
Other locals aren't so relaxed.
If that water comes down from Lismore and that surge is still here, good night.
One more restless sleep before the cyclone's long-anticipated arrival. Sean Turritt-Goodwin, ABC News, Ballina.
Let's go now to our reporters in Brisbane and in northern New South Wales. First to Laura Lavelle in Brisbane. Laura, have conditions taken a turn for the worse?
They certainly have, Isabel. The weather here has ramped up considerably in the past few hours. It's quite windy at the moment here in Brisbane, and we know the Gold Coast is currently being pounded by those dangerous winds as well. Residents across the southeast have been told to take shelter immediately if they haven't already, and be prepared to stay in their homes for up to 36 hours. Today, more than 50,000 homes lost power. Many are still without, and no doubt as Tropical Cyclone Alfred barrels onto the Queensland coast, power will be cut to more residences as well. Authorities say the following 24 hours will be difficult for those in southeast Queensland.
And let's bring in reporter Victoria Pengilly in northern New South Wales now. Victoria, how are things looking where you are?
Well, look, it's been a pretty wet and windy day here in Murwillumbah. The rain has been coming down pretty consistently. Much of the town lost power last night, and some phone towers have also gone out, which is an eerie sign of what's to come. There has been some minor flooding in low-lying areas, and the Tweed River is currently sitting at about 3 metres, which is still at minor flooding levels and well below the peak of 6.5 metres seen back in 2022. It is rising pretty quickly, though. We were down there a short time ago, and some locals warned us to get to higher ground. The real concern, though, is if this rain continues to fall, the water could breach the riverbanks and put hundreds of homes and businesses right in the firing line all over again.
Thanks, Victoria. Victoria Pengilly there. It's only hours now until Tropical Cyclone Alfred makes landfall. Here's ABC meteorologist Tom Saunders with what to expect from the severe weather conditions in the coming days.
Well, before Cyclone Alfred makes landfall, wind gusts today recorded up to 120 kilometres per hour at Cape Byron. Peak waves off Brisbane climbed to nearly 17 metres yesterday, and more than 400 millimetres of rain has drenched Dorrigo in 48 hours. And the severe weather has been ongoing for most of the week, including more than 48 hours with peak waves exceeding 10 metres off Tweed Heads. and already 3 consecutive days with damaging wind gusts at Byron Bay. Tonight, Alfred is less than 100 kilometres offshore and is forecast to cross the Moreton Bay Islands overnight before reaching the mainland on Saturday. It's during this period when destructive gusts may occur just south of the eye on the coastal fringe, along with the highest threat of erosion when high tide occurs around 4 a.m. The wind and wave threat will gradually ease after landfall. However, for most regions, the worst impacts will arrive under Alfred's deluge of rain, hundreds of millimetres on Saturday alone, focused in on Brisbane, the Gold Coast and the Northern Rivers. And the latest modelling now has torrential falls persisting into Sunday, another 300 millimetres possible near the border, while heavy rain also spreads west and flooding is possible on the New South Wales northern slopes and ranges. The remnants of Alfred will finally shift south and spread heavy rain to Sydney by the time we hit Monday. By then, widespread flooding across both southeast Queensland and northeast New South Wales.
Cyclone Alfred has scuttled the Prime Minister's hopes to call the federal election for April 12. National Affairs correspondent Jane Norman has more.
The Prime Minister was planning to call the election on Sunday for April 12, but with the cyclone yet to make landfall, he's confirmed to the ABC he'll wait. An April election would have enabled the Prime Minister to avoid a budget and the disruption of campaigning through Easter, Anzac Day and school holidays. But it's not to be. Parliament is now set to return on March 25 for the Treasurer's 4th budget, with an election to follow in May.
I have no intention of doing anything that distracts from what we need to do. And what we need to do is to look after each other at this difficult time.
At this point, only one thing's for sure: the election has to be held by May 17.
And coming up, a special edition of 7:30 with Sarah Ferguson.
For our cyclone coverage, I'll be joined by the Prime Minister, the Premier of Queensland, David Crisafulli, and our reporters on the ground.
The 17-year-old boy accused of bringing a shotgun onto a Jetstar flight yesterday allegedly said he had bombs in his bag before being tackled to the ground by heroic witnesses. Operations at Avalon Airport just outside of Geelong were back to normal today, but questions are mounting about how the extraordinary security breach was allowed to take place.
This is the incredible moment a teenager was detained on JQ610 to Sydney. The pilot kicking the butt of a shotgun out of his reach after panicked crew and front row passengers realised he wasn't airport staff but an alleged gunman.
Obviously pretty scary and alarming.
I'd like to know how he got as far as he did.
Outrageous, and they're unacceptable.
According to court documents, the teenager stole 2 12-gauge shotguns and a rifle from Turallo yesterday. The unsupervised learner driver is alleged to have travelled along Beach Road in Avalon before police say he entered a breach in the fence 2 kilometres west of the airport terminal and made his way to the plane. Once on board, saying, "I've got bombs in my bag," police say those bombs were fake.
Certainly our cabin manager asked the right questions as the gentleman hopped on the aircraft because she thought it was unusual.
The airport was off limits into the night. When morning broke, passengers returned. They were met with beefed up security, but it's still unclear why the breach wasn't detected sooner.
I don't want to get into the detail of any of the security issues, but we are confident that Avalon is working to address all these issues.
Australian airports are very safe and secure environments. We process 120 million customer movements a year in and out of our airfields, the big airports as well as our regional gateways.
We allegedly have an individual that can walk across the tarmac and onto a plane armed.
The 17-year-old is now facing a series of charges, including unlawfully taking control of an aircraft. He was remanded in custody today. No bail application was made. His alleged motive just one of a number of unanswered questions as investigations continue. Jessie Thompson, ABC News.
The state government says it's doing all it can to improve ambulance ramping at South Australian hospitals, despite a sharp increase in the latest data. South Australian ambulances spent almost 4,000 hours ramped in February, about 500 hours more than the previous month. The figure is down from a peak of 5,500 hours last July, but still higher compared with when Labor took office in March 2022, promising to fix the crisis. The Health Minister announced the latest ramping data Twitter while viewing progress on a 24-bed mental health rehabilitation centre in Adelaide's West. He says such facilities, once completed, will help to free up emergency departments.
We know that there's more work to do, and that's why we're standing here in a new facility which we're building to open much needed additional capacity in our system.
Their number one election commitment was to fix ramping. They urged people to vote like their life depends on it, but that sense of urgency that we saw from the Premier at the election has now completely evaporated, and South Australians are sick of waiting for him to deliver.
The state government has passed what it says are some of the country's strongest knife laws, restricting sales and expanding police powers. Under the changes, retailers must lock up particularly dangerous knives and aren't permitted to sell any knives to a minor. Police officers may now use handheld metal detectors to search people at declared shopping centres, licensed venues and on public transport. If police have intelligence that a violent incident could occur in any public place, they'll have the power to carry out wand searches in the area for up to 6 hours.
For the other attendees at those mass gatherings, that provides a greater sense of comfort that they and their families are going to be safe from other members of the community who might otherwise be tempted to bring a knife along to that gathering.
Now that the laws have passed, hopefully we'll see an improvement, but from our point of view, unfortunately, it's a little, too late by this government.
A judge in South Australia's Court of Disputed Returns has found that illegal practices affected results in the 2022 Adelaide City Council election. After a case spanning more than 2 years, Judge Michael Burnett has invited parties to make submissions about whether the result of the Central Ward poll should be made void and councillors forced to rerun. With more, here's reporter Eva Blandis.
The judgment comes more than 2 years after former Adelaide City Councillor Alexander Hyde made a petition to the Court of Disputed Returns challenging the validity of the 2022 election and the practices of the state's Electoral Commissioner and City Councillor Jing Lee. Mr Hyde was unsuccessful in the election and was the last person excluded, a margin of just 24 votes separating him and Mr Lee. The former councillor alleged the election was not free and fair, claiming people had acted on behalf of Mr Lee by taking possession of postal voting packs which didn't belong to them. Judge Burnett found that photographs provided to the court sustain these allegations in showing 2 men handling ballot papers at a CBD apartment building and restaurant. He said he was satisfied on the balance of probabilities that the result of the election was affected by the illegal practice, given that the margin in the election was so small. Mr Hyde has released a statement saying he welcomes the judgment and that it is a win for democracy, while Mr Lee said it would be inappropriate to make comments at this stage. Mr Hyde, Mr Lee and the Electoral Commissioner will all be given the opportunity to make submissions about whether or not the election results should be made void at a later date. Adelaide's Lord Mayor Jane Lomax-Smith has assured that the functions of the council will continue until a decision is made by the court.
Ukraine's president says he'll send negotiators to Saudi Arabia for talks with US officials after the White House suspended crucial military aid. Mr Zelensky has met with EU leaders who have unanimously agreed to boost defence spending to support Kyiv in its fight against Russia. Europe correspondent Zoe Ford reports from Brussels.
A warm welcome in the middle of a funding freeze. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky arrives in Brussels after a gruelling week, thanking European Union leaders for their support.
You made a strong signal to Ukrainian people, to Ukrainian warriors, to civilians, to all our families, and it's great that we are not alone.
The 27 EU countries unanimously backed plans to free up billions of dollars for defence following marathon talks, just days after the United States paused funding and support for Kyiv.
We are coming out of this European Council very determined to ensure Europe's security and to act with the scale, the speed and the resolve that this situation demands.
The Ukrainian president has also confirmed he'll send negotiators to Saudi Arabia next week for talks with US officials. He's vowing to work constructively with the Trump administration.
Ukraine wants to make a deal because I don't think they have a choice.
I also think that Russia wants to make a deal because in a different way that only I know, they have no choice either.
26 of the 27 EU leaders at this summit voiced their support for Kyiv, insisting there can be no talks about Ukraine without Ukraine and promising to continue the supply of aid. There wasn't consensus because, as expected, Hungary's Viktor Orban refused to join them. He supports Donald Trump's plan for direct talks with Moscow.
The policy of President Trump in that respect is more than right.
Meanwhile, Russian forces are continuing to advance through Ukraine's Donetsk region, shelling the city of Kramatorsk and claiming they've captured another village. Ukraine putting out fires one battle at a time. Mazoe Ford, ABC News.
Pope Francis has thanked well-wishers in an audio message he recorded in hospital. It's after doctors confirmed his condition has remained stable for a third day. Here's Michelle Rimmer.
The message came as a surprise to well-wishers who had gathered for a nightly prayer service for Pope Francis here at St Peter's Square. The message, which was recorded in Spanish by the 88-year-old pontiff earlier in the day, was played to the crowd and was met with applause. In the message, Pope Francis thanked those that had been praying for his recovery, and he said that he is with them. He also wished blessings upon them. This is the first time that the pontiff's voice has been heard since he entered Rome's Gemelli Hospital 3 weeks ago. He still hasn't been seen in public. In its latest medical update, the Vatican said that his condition has stabilised. That's after he suffered 2 respiratory crises earlier this week. He was initially admitted to hospital with bronchitis, but is now known to be battling pneumonia in both of his lungs. His doctors have told us not to expect daily medical updates, which we've been receiving up until now. That's because his condition has been stable for a number of days and they no longer deem a running commentary of his treatment necessary. Despite these seemingly positive signs, however, the Vatican says that his prognosis is still guarded, which means that they're not confident that he's out of danger yet.
Michelle Rimmer there. The daughter of Frenchwoman Giselle Pellicot, whose mass rape case shocked the world last year, has pressed charges against her father. Caroline Darian filed the legal complaint against Dominique Pellicot months after he was convicted of drugging and raping her mother and inviting dozens of men to do the same. He was sentenced to 20 years in jail. Among the records he kept were pictures of his daughter naked or semi-naked, wearing underwear she said she doesn't recognise. Ms Darian says initial investigations into her mother's case did not sufficiently look into her own allegations. Dominique Pellicot has denied assaulting his daughter. US President Donald Trump has paused nearly all tariffs imposed on Mexico and Canada until next month. The reversal comes just 2 days after Mr. Trump imposed a 25% tax on America's 2 closest trading partners. Mexico has welcomed the move and Canada has postponed some of its tariffs against the US until early April. Mr. Trump's tariff plans have rattled Wall Street and alarmed American consumers. To finance now, it was another bruising day for markets, which continue to react badly to President Trump's sudden shifts in trade policy. The Australian share market in particular has fallen to a new 6-month low. Here's David Chow.
Well, Donald Trump's policy announcements are kind of like turning on and turning off a light switch. The US president now wants to delay his 25% tariffs on most Mexican goods and some Canadian imports for about a month. And that's on top of yesterday's decision to give car makers a 1-month exemption from those tariffs. But investors are just over it. All that uncertainty and the constant backflipping, that led to the local share market falling by a pretty steep 1.8% today, with tech, banking and healthcare among the worst performing stocks. And when you zoom out, you can see the ASX is now at its lowest level in 6 months. Overseas, things were looking pretty ugly for Wall Street and the FTSE as well, though Chinese markets bucked the trend. Now, you can really see the pessimism on Wall Street's tech index. The Nasdaq is down 10% from its record high, so it's officially a correction. But that's nothing compared to Tesla, which has lost half its value in 3 months. Its EV sales have been falling quite sharply these past few months in Australia, Europe and even California, where its headquarters used to be. Although Elon Musk's tilt towards right-wing politics has cost him billions, don't worry, he's doing all right. Meanwhile, gold is down slightly, oil prices are near a 3-year low, and the Aussie dollar has slipped to 63 US cents. But it's nothing quite as dramatic as Bitcoin. The original cryptocurrency jumped when President Trump signed an executive order to create a strategic Bitcoin reserve. But it quickly fell again when people found out this reserve will be funded exclusively by Bitcoin that US authorities have already seized from criminals. So it seems taxpayers won't be footing the bill. And that's finance.
The AFL season kicks off tonight with the Sydney Swans taking on Hawthorn at the SCG. The reigning minor premiers and resurgent Hawks are first up after the original opening match in Queensland was postponed to avoid Cyclone Alfred. The Swans are seeking redemption in 2025 after losing last year's grand final. Meanwhile, GWS is preparing for Sunday's match with Collingwood at Sydney's Olympic Park. The Giants won't be at full strength, with key forwards Jesse Hogan and Jake Stringer both out injured.
Adapt. We'll pick a team that we think is capable of kicking the score, pressuring Collingwood's backs and forcing turnovers for us. So the method doesn't really change, the personnel will.
Adelaide United will welcome back a trio of young guns from national duties for tomorrow's match against Brisbane. Luka Jovanovic, Johnny Yule and Pana Kikianis helped guide Australia to its first men's under-20 Asian Cup win and returned to help the Reds overcome a winless 3-match streak. The Raw has announced it'll be without Florin Beronga and former Red Ben Halloran, who've decided to stay home with family through Tropical Cyclone Alfred. Reds coach Carl Viet says Kikianis will start after a string of defensive lapses from his side in recent weeks.
Pana will come back in. You know, he's an integral part of our team, and we sort of missed that little bit of calmness at the back. Even though he's a very young player, he provides that calmness and that passing ability that he brings that suits the way that we want to play.
Adelaide's women's team will take centre stage tomorrow on International Women's Day in the primetime night slot at Hindmarsh Stadium. Adelaide has surged into the top 4 by going undefeated in its last 10 games. But that streak will be put to the test when it takes on fellow finals contender Central Coast tomorrow night. Time to check all the weekend weather details now, and tonight's photo is from Julie Ninnis and it was taken in the Adelaide CBD. It was dry and hot across Adelaide today. In the city, it reached 35.1 degrees around 5 o'clock this afternoon after dropping to 16.1 overnight. Conditions were much the same across the state before storms developed about the north and west this afternoon. Tops in the major centres ranged from 22 at Cape Willoughby to 40 at Moomba and Oodnadatta. Cloud over the east coast of the country is associated with Tropical Cyclone Alfred that we heard about earlier, bringing that torrential rain, damaging winds and hazardous surf. Showery winds are expected tomorrow for coastal and inland parts of New South Wales and southwest WA, with wet and stormy weather across the top end. So, storms for Darwin tomorrow with 34 degrees, remaining hot over the interior with 40 for Alice Springs, sunny and 32 degrees for Melbourne. Back home, those storms about parts of the west and north will continue tomorrow, with temperatures well above average for some districts, 38 degrees for Coober Pedy and Port Pirie. Staying dry and very hot across the south, with 36 degrees in a number of centres, including Maitland and Coonawarra, 37 degrees the top for Mount Gambier. A severe heatwave warning is in place for Lower Eyre Peninsula, Kangaroo Island, Mount Lofty Ranges, Murraylands and the lower southeast. Staying clear and hot across Adelaide tomorrow, 36 degrees the top for the city after an overnight low of 23. On the waters, southeasterly winds to 15 knots before dawn, becoming variable about 10 knots during the morning, seas below 1 metre. The sun will rise around 7:10 and set at 7:45. And it's staying hot for the week ahead, 37 degrees forecast for Sunday, 38 degrees on Monday, then temperatures should range from the low to mid-30s until this time next week. That's the latest from the Adelaide newsroom. Thanks so much for your company this evening. To keep up to date with our coverage of Tropical Cyclone Alfred, tune into a special edition of News Breakfast tomorrow at 5 a.m. or get the latest news at news.abc.net.au. For now, stay with us. Sarah Ferguson is up next with a special edition of 7:30. Have a great night.